Craig, I mentioned this about SMU. We've been teasing it for the majority of the show. But with its move to the SEC, and this is from Ross Dellinger from Yahoo, SMU expected to get a full $6 million annual payout from the CFP like the other Power 5 schools. However, CFP leaders are meeting Monday in Houston. That's in question, and he has a fantastic article on very in-depth about G5 to P5 moves and how it works. So to put this in a very simple nutshell.
Please do, because I have a hard time explaining it simply.
It's complicated, but for everybody to get for a school to get a full payout, it has to be a unanimous choice by everyone to say, yes, this school is now part of the big money schools. We're going to give them this money. So SMU, when they joined the ACC, while foregoing the television revenue, fully expected this $6 million to be part of their budget every year. Now, I doubt that this is going to make them change their mind. It's not, but it has brought up an interesting question. Greg Sankey is kind of the one leading this charge of, look, the more people we let in, the more we share this money. And he said it in the most politically, straightforward way he could, but he's like, that's really not the business we're in right now. And so you get into, this is the line drawing in the sand more of the haves and have-nots and who they want to let into this group. And, look, outside of Oregon State and Washington State, the Power 5, as far as the number of schools, is not smaller. Like, those are the two schools that are out, but there are now 5 more schools that are in, so you're still +3 in adding Power 5 schools when you talk about the 4 Big 12 schools that were not in the Power 5 and now are, and SMU that joined the ACC. So while getting rid of the Pac-12 was at least maybe initially thought to render some schools out of the Power 5, maybe as many as 4. Well, that didn't happen, and then one more came over with them at SMU. So now it's a very interesting situation of, is SMU going to get this money? It does seem, with all the money going around, giving $6 million to SMU doesn't seem to be that big of a deal, but I do think that SMU is being put in the position of being the sacrificial lamb for the schools that don't want to add anybody more into the college football playoff pie.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty clear way of explaining everything. And so, what's in debate now is how much SMU is actually going to receive, depending on which way this sways. And I think this was something that was bubbling up because I was very curious about one particular thing during the entire realignment saga, whatever chapter this is, that we really do we feel like we ended a chapter with the Pac and the ACC and now we start a new one now?
Yeah.
I mean, does that feel fair? Because that was like a whole saga with the Pac and just I think they have their own chapter, right? So when all that dust settled, I was curious as well about one particular thing, and that was for all this talk about the Power 2 or all this talk about consolidation, how are we adding more teams? Mm-hmm. If we're consolidating and the group's getting more exclusive, then how is SMU now a Power 5 team and BYU is now a Power 5 team and this, Cincinnati's now a Power, so like there's more power schools than there was before what was supposed to be consolidation and realignment, and that just never really made sense to me. So I was just curious how it was going to continue to work. Well, here's your answer, Paul, is that they're trying to slim it down even more so. And so now SMU is in question about whether or not they will be able to get that money. And this was something that the Big 12 ran into, and they had this issue when it came up with their new schools that came in, but it was voted on that they would be able to go ahead and get those shares. And so now that you're finally starting to see that stop sign pop up from those wanting to see where all the money goes and where all the money's going to be going moving forward, of saying, wait a second, hold on, we're not just going to be giving this out to anybody. So it's quite the predicament that SMU could find itself in. Now this comes from Ross Dellinger, and a lot of what is passed along to him eventually, becomes a pretty big talking point. And certainly from an SMU perspective, this is a huge talking point. But it points out that schools in the past that made the jump from the G5 to Power 5 also saw a leap in their distribution from the CFP. The difference in annual payout between G5 teams, $1 million, and P5 teams, $6 million, is substantial. That's a $5 million difference. And when you take into account that SMU's foregoing their TV revenue, I know they got more money than God, but eventually, you need some money coming in, buddy.
Yeah, you want somebody to send you a check.
And especially when you were banking on, okay, well, we're not going to get the conference distribution, but at least we'll get this share of the playoff money. So that's $5 million more than we were getting originally. So, hey, that'll help offset some of this.
And part of it was, look, they only had like a $10 million a year television contract as it was.
Yes.
So in their minds, and when we talked to Rick Hart about this, he was on the show, I remember asking, I said, so for clarification for people who are going, oh my God, you're foregoing $40 million a year or whatever it is. He said, well, we don't really look at it that way. We look at it as we're foregoing 10 because that's what we were getting or whatever it was. Like they weren't getting that much. So, we only really have to with the resources we have allocated to the program, we really don't have to make up that much money right now because we've got donors that are willing to do that. But in their mind, they weren't really foregoing 10 or 12 or whatever it was, or 9, I don't know what the distribution was. They were foregoing whatever it was minus 6. So or plus 6. So they were going to make it up, So they thought that okay, the gap will be a little bit smaller and we'll have some of this operational money. But now that may not necessarily be the case. Now they'll probably wind up getting something out of this, I would think, because the move has been made and they'll have plenty of advocates that will say hey, let's not get too crazy here about.
Well, Sankey says you have to have a unanimous vote.
Yeah.
And so there's a lot of politics and various things involved there.
But this is also Premier Sankey, Kim Jong Sankey, sending out his message of, look, I'm not just going to let, I've been, he's telling the world his message. Look, the SEC is all that matters. I've been out here saying that the SEC is the only one that matters. So I'm not just going to let anybody come in and get the same money as the SEC is going to get. And that is the hill he's going to fight on for,
And if he was doing that before, I don't really fault him when he's suddenly like, okay, so now SMU is now sharing the same money. And not just don't want to pick on the ponies here, but I do think if you're Greg Sankey and this is all heading a certain direction, all of a sudden there's more Power 5 teams than there were before, and there's still technically the same number of conferences, although the Pac-12's very much in just no man's land at this point, but until they don't exist, they exist. There's still that to kind of figure out as well, how all that works. And so this is a couple of years of an issue, though. This isn't like a forever thing, because we know that they're working already on the next round of whatever the CFP contract is going to look like and the distribution model for their coming up in 2026, and whatever the playoffs going to look like. That's all still very much coming down the track. So this is just for the next couple of years. But, when you are SMU and you've already made this sacrifice to not accept TV revenue as a way to join the ACC, and you're expecting these payouts to, be there and offset some of your spending, at some point, you do need money coming in. And so this would be money that you were expecting that's suddenly not there, and how problematic that could be. Well, it points out, without the CFP, SMU's first 9 years in the ACC may generate annually roughly half of what it earned in distribution while in the AAC. So that right there is where you're like, whoa, as first 9 years in the ACC may generate annually roughly half of what SMU earned in distribution while in the American. So that was part of making that deal. They got themselves a spot in the club, but it's how much longer is the club open? What happens with the ACC? So if you're SMU, these last few weeks, man, have had to have been just mind-numbingly crazy in terms of just what conference you're in and what that's going to look like, and whether or not you are going to be at the table that you thought you were going to be at when you first had that announcement made that you were joining the ACC, because it's not 4 months later what it looked like when you first joined. There's been all this other Florida State, hand-wringing, and now you're hearing all of the North Carolina or the Big Ten or all the other movement that's possible with the typical schools that are mentioned. That's all gone on. They haven't even stepped foot in the conference yet. And now you're looking at potentially not getting the money that you thought you might be getting. And again, they're richer than most out there. But at some point, you do need some you were, I'm assuming banking on some of these millions of dollars that were extra money, and the part of the big pull of being in the ACC. That's no longer looking like it'll be the case. So yeah, that was a very interesting nugget to drop earlier today, and it just makes sense because again, if you're consolidating and you're shrinking, and it's moving towards this whole new idea of what the power conferences look like and anything, it just puzzled me. Okay, SMU, that's fine. Okay, that's one team. The Big 12 added Cincinnati and Houston and UCF and BYU, but the CFP voted to continue to give them the same payments. But now they're saying no. That's the basic deal with this. Now they're saying, all right, no. Now we don't necessarily want to continue doing that and adding more mouse to the table than what was there originally, when the whole idea is to make the table a bit more exclusive. So that's a battle that's looming and a war that's looming, and this will be a fascinating case to follow as far as how that works for SMU here over these next couple of years and what they may decide to do as far as that goes. And then you've got, here in a couple of years, or in these next couple of years, they're going to be renegotiating the new contract with. Which
is what probably scares schools like SMU a little bit more, because if they're the message, if they're the, if they're the mafia, like we're going to do this to send a message and hopefully to, let everybody know where it's going to be, then if SMU is going to be like that, then there's going to be a lot of other schools that are like, well, what is really going to be the plan here?
Yeah, I mean, because it did get a little crazy with the ACC too, and I guess the PAC to a lesser extent, but this was the PAC when they were trying to survive. But if you're looking at the PAC and they're going to rebuild, right? Mm-hmm. Who are they going to go rebuild with? And the CFP is just going to sign off of like, yeah, San Diego State, sure, and New Mexico, come on, and UNLV and Oregon State, Washington State, you were already here, but that doesn't sound like what they're going to be to do.
It sounds like they're basically telling those schools,
like, you're not going to get the same piece of the pie that even if you have the Pac-12 name, you're not going to be treated like the old Pac-12 on equal footing with the rest of them. It's kind of the message that I would be getting if I were those schools. And so when the ACC was adding SMU, it's like, okay, Cal and Stanford, like, they're already Power 5, I get that. But then when you started to see, well, what's next? Like, let's get Rice. And I know some of that's just realignment, just talk, and that's just, fantasy booking and whatever on social media or on websites or whatever. But I was sitting there scratching my head of like, wait, now Tulane's going to join the party, and Rice, and like, how many teams are we adding here to the quote-unquote power leagues? Because there's not, like, they're not going to want to do that.
Yeah.
You're not just going to be able to add. The whole point is that it's separating is the idea. And so, yeah, that never added up to me. The whole idea of just filling in, adding. And so, yeah, it looks like this is going to be kind of the line drawn in the sand potentially. If, in fact, the CFP does decide to not give SMU the Power 5 payout. And so we'll see. Like, maybe things change and this isn't the case, but if they do, as Ross points out in his article, the association would basically, if they denied SMU Power 5 funding, the association sets a moratorium on additional revenue for those schools elevated from G5 to Power 5, a policy likely to even span into a new CFP contract starting in 2026. The move is yet another sign that college leaders are attempting to restrict D1's highest body from further expansion. And so that's the message being sent, is like, no, we're not going to add all these new teams to the PAC and the ACC or the Big 12 and keep giving them the same payouts. So if you're Cincinnati and Houston and BYU and
you got in under the wire.
You got in like right in time, basically. I mean, I think you were maybe the last on the lifeboat, or maybe. Yeah, I guess you would have been, because SMU would have been the last G5.
Look, Stanford and Cal are only not having this problem because they were already there.
Yeah, I mean they were already in the club, basically. Yeah. So, but yeah, I mean, SMU was like the last person to get into the club before they changed the rules of entry, basically. But now they're saying, I don't know, we got to review the film. You might have got in like a second too late. We got to convene on this.
Yeah.
But I mean, if you're any of those other schools, and I don't say this happily at all, but if you are UNLV and Boise State and Rice, and I don't know how much serious Rice was. That was the whole academic idea, I guess, of what you could look at. But Tulane,
Memphis,
name the teams that have all been mentioned throughout. Like, this is not a good day for you if this is what is going to happen with SMU.
Well, and look, even if they keep they're going to have the 5+7 model and a group of 5 team is going to get in, they're basically also telling you that, like, even when we renegotiate this deal, you're not getting that much more money. You're just lucky to be here. So even if we let you in the next iteration of this, that's just going to be how it is. You're not getting.
Yeah, there's
you're not
8
getting-
more teams, but you still have one spot basically.
Yeah, and that one spot is the same value.
Yeah.
Like you're still getting this is the congratulations, you won the claw machine kind of a grab here of this. And trying to rebuild the Pac-12, the way I think of that and the way that they're looking at it is, do you guys remember Orange Julius? In the mall, there used to be the Orange Julius.
Yeah.
Okay, you can still get an Orange Julius.
What's the mall?
Yeah, for real. Another point. But you used to be able to go to the mall, you get an Orange Julius. Now, if you want an Orange Julius, you have to go to a Dairy Queen. That is what the Pac-12 is now. They still have Orange Julius, but it's in another thing, and it's not really its own deal anymore.